So I'm absolutely privileged to welcome Robby Duguay to the podcast. Thank you very much for joining us, Robby. How are you doing?
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm doing quite well, thanks.
And congratulations with the new release of the Fossil Hunters soundtrack. It's an absolutely beautiful collection of music between yourself and then the arrangements with Trevor Allen Gomez as well. How do you feel to
Yeah.
finally have it out there?
Oh, it's wonderful, and the response has been so very good so far. It's been a long time in the works. Yeah, working with Trevor has been fantastic. Working with Budapest has been great.
Mm.
The album features Doug Perry, the percussionist. He was a treat to work with. Just all around, and our team at Level Curve was really good as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a small project of people that and a team that all work together to make Fossil Hunters happen. But the music is really vast and expansive. How did you get involved in that, and where did the idea come to have a huge orchestral score?
Well, so the inspiration for the music side of things came from a few different areas, a few different projects we looked at before. Compositionally, I really took a big note from a game that's really important to me, Super Mario World. If you listen to the soundtrack of Super Mario World, there's basically just
Mm.
like one main theme that plays throughout the entire game, but it's done in so many different styles and so many different, time signatures and speeds and stuff. But you still, no matter what, everything feels familiar
Mhm.
because of that main, do 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 everywhere. So when we started this project, I said, I have to find what that melody is for Fossil Hunters. And once that was established, we were able to sort of break it out into more styles. And with the piano version and the original version that I made, and then the version with Budapest. So the actual the line itself sort of takes a page from the old John Williams Indiana Jones kind of style
Mhm.
with the Raiders March, or you look at even like Monster Hunter. If you know the main intro fanfare from that, like
Mhm.
that, when the devs, by the way, you said small team. Yeah, there's like five, maybe six people at Reptoid at any given time. Like it's not a
Wow.
huge development team. Yeah, but they're big fans of Monster Hunter, and they said, we really love the way that this sets the tone for the game you're about to play. We want that, but for this, digging, family-friendly adventure in these mines. And I said, yeah, okay, let's cool it. Let's do that. So I came up with this line, and at the time, there were two things I really wanted to do with it. One was when I picture a cave, I sort of imagine like the stalactites and stalagmites to sort of be like an instrument you could play,
Mm.
maybe blame cartoons or whatever. But I sort of imagine it to have that kind of sound. So I thought, what, this absolutely needs to have marimba. So I approached Doug Perry. He was thrilled with the idea, and he actually even said, if you think back to Saint Saëns with Danse Macabre, or the Carnival of the Animals with the Fossils movement,
Mhm.
there's a lot of use of marimba, xylophone, that kind of like percussion bone sound.
Mm.
Well, so, we really wanted to establish that feeling. From there, I thought, I really want to have some piano versions involved in this. So I approached Trevor, who had just finished or was just working on his Pokemon piano collections album. I think he was just writing it at the time.
Mm.
Uh,
Which
anyway,
is
so I approached
fabulous,
him.
isn't it? That.
Oh, it's so very good. Yeah. And it's like the most complete Pokemon fan album, I think, in
Mhm.
existence.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
just like, yeah, gold stars across the board. So I approached him, and he said, "Yeah, I'd also like to help you with arrangement, because that's actually his background. He has
Mm.
a master's or a doctorate in like orchestral composition, if you believe it. I mean, I believe it, but
Wow. Yeah.
yeah. So fantastic arranger, orchestrator, and he said, like, look, this music is good, but it could use a coat of paint and some, counter melodies and stuff like that. And I said, "Yeah, I'm all for it. Let's do it." So he started arranging the pieces originally for me to perform and for me to, track in MIDI, and that because I played brass. So in the
Mhm.
original versions of these tracks, I'm playing all the brass parts.
Wow.
Yeah. Uh, so the idea to work with Budapest came up because Trevor had worked with them in the past.
Ah.
Um, he has recorded with them a handful of times, and he said, "You know what? Like, I've got a contact there. If you can come up with XYZ budget, they can give us XYZ amount of time, and we can get some of the tracks to be fully performed by this 60-piece orchestra. And I had to kind of hum and haw about it because it's not a small undertaking. But ultimately, we decided to go with it, and I've never regretted it for a second. I mean, it's a fantastic performance.
Absolutely, and it's funny that you mention how the stalactites and stalagmites are almost like bones, because when you listen to the suite of music that all comes from, it feels like you are on the dig yourself, and that translates through into the music. So it does feel very percussive and like it tremors through you.
Right, and I was giving direction to Doug when I was preparing him for the recordings, and I said, think about being the seven dwarves, and that song that they sing when they're coming out of the mine, where they've got all the thing, the dig, 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 dig. I really want that like that percussive, the eighth notes and the accents. I really want that to come through, and obviously he delivered in spades.
Definitely, and so
just like a little spade joke.
I applaud. Well done. But that's fascinating though, because how do you then transition from it being primarily where you've arranged stuff in a brass format to how does that then play out? Talk us through that process, because that must be really difficult and quite almost overwhelming to then spread out to having everyone playing everything then.
So a little bit of the secret sauce in that is the brass arrangements carried through almost verbatim. So that introduction, da 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 da, that sort of that rhythm and that brass section, that was in the original. But then all of the flowery, over the top swells and things, that all came in after. So how we made up for that before was we had some VST strings doing some pizzicato stuff. That sort of helped fill in and be more percussive without sounding too fakey. We had some harp in there. The marimba in the main theme was featured a lot more before. And the flute part did exist. Actually, Trevor originally had performed the flute part himself as like a counter melody to the main French horn. So it was basically making it just a bigger, more caricature version of itself, as opposed to becoming something completely new, which was nice. It made it a little bit easier on everybody.
That sounds like a dream come true, I guess, to be able to work with
Absolutely.
I know you spoke about different ways of getting inspiration from things outside of the game, but what do they give you to work on beforehand when you're thinking of that main melody? Because it's such a stomper and it's got that gallop to it. And do you get given any concept art or anything like that to go on to beforehand?
Yes. So I've actually had a working relationship with Ryan Miller, who's one of the founders of Reptoid, since 2012. We met at a convention. We exchanged business cards, and then, oh, hey, I heard about this thing. Oh, and then we'd end up on a project together. Oh, hey, I heard about this other thing. And then we'd work together again. So we sort of, from studio to studio had a good working relationship. So when they first made the very first prototype for this game, which it was very, very different, I played it in our office. I had the controller in my hand and said, like, wow, this is really cool. What are you planning to do with it? So they continued to polish it, and I sort of from a distance, kept up with how development was going until they got their funding years later. So by the time it was time to write the music, I was already quite familiar with how the game played and sort of what the intention was behind it. They brought on an artist at one point, Emma Burkett, who actually did the album art. And her style and mixed with Ryan and Simon's art style really sort of brought things to life in a new way, which brought that more Nintendo look, if I can call it that. It's not quite, but you know what I'm saying, like that stylism. So they had given me some of the concept art and like the painting stuff that the Emma really excels at. And I mean, being a part of the team for so much of the journey, even if I wasn't, sitting there on payroll and being, an official team member, being a part of the project for that long really helped me to be familiar. So it was nice. It was really nice to be able to realize how I felt about that.
And I guess that then brings me on to previous projects that you've worked with before. So, as someone who didn't realize that you'd done games that I'd personally played, this is very, very different to previous more electronica entrenched music, or where you've got different varieties where things are heavily synth or MIDI based beforehand.
Right.
Do you go around processing or thinking about music and the composition of it differently when you know that it's going to be orchestrated, or was that later on down the line when you then had to do that transition over?
I think about music in a sort of a design sense. So I don't do much, if any, composition outside of video games.
Hmm.
So when I'm thinking about how a piece of music is going to be played or perceived, that's very much locked for me with how it's going to be played.
Right.
So how does it feel to listen to this song when it's in a menu screen versus how does it feel to break a block, solve a puzzle, jump over a thing, shoot an alien when this song is playing? So that is a large part of how I compose. And I feel like the responsibility to us as sound designers and as game composers is to reinforce what a game is already designed to do.
Hmm.
So whether that pulls from my experience with orchestras or rock bands or electronica, glitch, whatever, the emotions and feelings I have associated with playing in a jazz band will then be associated with that kind of gameplay. So I think like, oh, I want this game to feel like this. How have I felt like this musically before? And then I look back into my like Rolodex of musical feelings that I've had,
Yeah, yeah. That's fascinating. I guess for you then, when you're thinking of that, because it's so driven by the experience and trying to, I guess, complement what's already there, does a feeling come before a melody, or does it change depending on the type of environment or type of game that you're working with?
The feeling is absolutely established by the game. Oftentimes, by the time I'm on a project, I actually have something playable that I can mess around with before I start to write music.
Right.
Or if in the case of like, not necessarily We Are Doomed, but for Graceful Explosion Machine, I was in the door when the game was being like very early concept phase. I can talk to, with the example of Graceful Explosion Machine, with Mo, we can have a conversation. It's like, hey, what's going to be happening in this? How do you feel? What are your inspirations? And he can send me reference, which, reference music is sometimes contentious, especially in the film world. But if I can figure out, oh, he likes these 5 songs and their similarity is the way that the bass presents itself, I can start writing music that uses that kind of bass part.
Mm-hmm.
To start to zero in on what this is supposed to feel like. So sometimes it's more nebulous where it's like with Mo, he'll say, I want this, and I sort of try to zero in on it. And other times it's, here's the gameplay, how does it make you feel? Well, okay, let's come up with this cool thing. So it could go either way, but that's mostly my approach, is it's very much around how that game makes me personally feel.
Sure, sure. And I guess it would be remiss of me to not touch on track number 7 of the Fossil Hunter soundtrack. There is a homage to a beautiful elevator theme that's going on in there, which is completely different to everything else that's on either side of it. It's literally like the audio equivalent of taking out the cassette and flipping it over, and that wait in between. What inspired that? It's beautiful.
It was a joke, actually, in the office. We were talking about building out the orchestrations at that time, and they just had overhauled the menu system. Originally, the menu would continue the world music in its dynamic state, and then it would, as you went to the different levels in the menu, it would change to that new world's music. It's like, okay, cool, straightforward. It gets the point across. And then I can't remember who it was who said like, oh, but it would be great if it was elevator music. I don't remember if it was me or Jamie or maybe Emma. I forget. Sorry, person who's listening. I wish I could give you credit. But they said, why don't we have elevator music for the elevator? And I thought, I can absolutely make that happen. We already had the main melody established. We were already going to orchestration. All I had to do was, take 2 or 3 lines out of what that was going to be and run it through my old like Final Fantasy synthesizer, and we were good to go. So I don't know. I a little bit like tongue in cheek. It's definitely a joke, but it also like it's elevator music for the elevator, so it works at the same time.
I just thought it was genius and halfway through because I hadn't quite looked at the track listing all the way through, and I was on my commute home, and when it came on, whilst I was just waiting for my train to slow down, it was just beautiful poetry. It couldn't have planned it better. So thank you.
So
for
happy
that.
to hear it. That's great. Yeah. The other thing is like you have to come up with a designed reason to split up the album. Like working on Fate Tectonics, there's 2 sides to that album as well, and you sort of have to think, if this goes to vinyl or tape or something, how will you make that work? Well, I had the Fate Tectonics soundtrack is so dynamic, and the music changes all the time based on the gameplay. How was I going to show the peaceful version of the music and the destructive version of the music? Well, I decided to do like a Serenity version and a destruction version. So I did like a side A, side B. And I thought, you know what, with this world, when you're in the game, you're hearing the orchestral versions. And when you're in the pause menu, it transitions to the piano versions. How am I going to show side A and side B? Well, you take the elevator.
It is perfectly done, I must admit. And I guess so it's the second, at least, soundtrack that you've done where you've got very different sides interplaying with each other. Is that something that you really enjoy doing, taking themes and then doing various different versions of them?
Yeah, 100%. I feel like that's something that we have as a strength in game design that something like a film can't pull off. If you've got a movie and in movies we do time code and frame lock, in frame 3000, let's say, there's like a kiss scene. Well, that may or may not happen in frame 3000 in the game. So how do you adapt the music to what the player is actually doing? Well, oftentimes you do multiple versions of the same song depending on the action. So I always think about it in that kind of concept before the actual music gets made.
That must be quite difficult to sit and work in transitions in and out, in the same way that I guess it must be very difficult to get the feeling of an orchestra being able to transition from smaller to big and so on and so forth, but like 10 times more difficult when it's dynamic. Right.
So thankfully, first of all, credit where credit's due. The orchestration was handled largely by Trevor, so I didn't have to worry that was going to get done right or wrong. He just knew what he was doing, and that's fine. So that was broken out without any stress on my part. Well although when the 60 stems came back from the orchestra and I had to mix it, that was another thing entirely. But what we did was when the orchestra is playing, that's sort of one piece of things. So you don't have to break that out any more than just like that's one version, thankfully. In some things like Fake Tectonics, there's 16 instruments that are coming in and out at any given time. You really have to think about how that's going to come together. So yeah, it could be simpler or more complicated, but as long as you've designed a solid system from the get-go, it's usually quite rewarding.
So I get you've kind of jumped onto my next question that I was going to say about dynamicness and mixing. Mixing a 60 stem orchestra. Where on earth do you begin with that?
Well, first you align them. Gosh. So how do you mix a 60 stem orchestra recording? I only had a few days to do all of the mixes for the game, if I'm being quite honest. The only time we could get the session with Budapest booked was, I think, a week before the Steam release of the game. So I had to just mix for 2 days straight, and I couldn't see properly.
You wouldn't be able to hear
I think my approach
properly
was
as well,
that.
I'd imagine.
Pardon me?
You wouldn't be able to hear properly by the end of it either,
No,
I'd
no,
imagine.
and that's the thing is like when you're monitoring on proper speakers, you get ear fatigue after a number of
Mm,
hours, depending on how loud you listen. So you have to really play it safe. If you get to a certain point and you hit that ear fatigue point and you push on, you then ruin multiple days following worth of work.
mm,
So that's one thing you got to watch out for. And I came really close to my limits in this session. So I think my approach to mixing the 60 stems was I'd first listen to, they gave us multiple versions of room mics. So like an XY mic at the conductor's position, and then two room mics mid left and right, and then two room mics far left and right. So I just, solo those, find out what the balance of the room is like, and then go from there. And then you go through and you make your automation to mute all the tracks when the spot mics aren't in use. And then you start to say, oh, well, I like the oboe part here to stand out more than the bassoon part over here. And you start tweaking and you start tweaking and you start tweaking, and it never ends. And then you die and then the game comes out.
Because because it's in that mix that the nuances of the character of each of the instruments, you get to almost be the master of the destiny of what peaks out, what your ear tweaks up and picks up on as you go through, because it's such a dynamic and bombastic representation. Each of the tracks has got a real flow and energy to it. Is it the mixing where that comes out in for you?
Uh, Partially. I mean, that's sort of my imprint of how it should be heard. A
Mm,
lot of that comes from the way that it's composed. So when I originally wrote these pieces, it's like, okay, this is the A section, this is the B section, like very traditional classical approach to how a piece is laid out.
right.
Because you also have to consider when we hit a looping point, you want to make the listener not realize that it's a looping point. So how does the end actually introduce the beginning again?
Hmm.
How do you make it so that you give the listener a break? So let's say you're using the same melody 6 times in a row.
Hmm.
Suddenly a new melody for 2 parts is like, wow, this new thing, this is such a nice new break, the listener thinks to themselves in their subconscious. And then, oh yeah, that's this familiar thing that I remember from before.
Yep.
So some of that is composition, and then some of that is arrangement. So Trevor did this thing where he would call out in certain instruments, and that actually made my job easier because I understood where those parts were supposed to be in the mix. So if he has a call out from a flute, it's like, okay, well, this is the flute solo moment. Everywhere else in the piece, they can be at -20 because no one, you can hear them in the room mics or whatever. The approach was at that point, they're the
Yeah.
gain stage part.
Sure, sure. So, I guess as someone who has composed for a lot of different types of projects, but
Mhm.
primarily in the smaller teams that are all about the get up and go, and as High Play Music, we do love our indie music and our indie games as well.
Mm.
Do you have any particular tips for indie musicians or indie composers who are looking to get into game music, and kind of quick wins that can help you either with time, budget, or just generally getting ideas onto some kind of canvas to get yourself up and away?
Mm. Uh, well, from the conception stage of things, I'm really quick to throw ideas away. Usually, when I sit down to write music, I have a sort of rule to myself that my first song is a throwaway. And the
Wow.
name song is very, I'm using it loosely. It could be like a 16 bar idea
Hmm.
with, two instruments. Uh, so from that stage, it's like, okay, I'm gonna sit down and now's my music writing time. I'll write this thing and I'll listen to the song back when I'm done with it and say, well, yeah, that's a throwaway, and I put it away in a folder
Hmm.
to probably never think about it ever again unless something comes up that it's perfect for,
Sure.
which has never happened. Um, but it's there. I know that they're there. Anyway, from that point on, you just you have to kind of zero in on the idea through iteration. So my point with that is don't be afraid to ditch things if they're not working, because in the end you'll save yourself a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of pulling out your hair if you just try a new thing that might work better,
Mm.
and finally find the thing that works. Because you need to find that magic moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Where,
Mhm.
where would you, do you have a particular magic moment in Fossil Hunters that stands out to you as the, yeah, I done that?
Yeah, I think it was when we finally settled on the do, 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 like that
Hmm.
main line. I said, okay, with that motif, I can make a whole soundtrack. That was like the lock it in moment. And I remember I did I think 12, maybe 13 different demos when I was trying to prepare that theme. And so like they were all different feels, and I would send them to the team and they'd listen. I'd usually send them in batches of 5 or 6. And so we got to the second batch of, I guess it was 6 in this case. Uh, and by the time I got to the third demo, I'm like, I really like this melody. And like demo 4 was just the same melody again in a different style. Demo 5 was the same melody in a different style. And just like, okay, we've narrowed it down. This is we like this. And so then they picked whatever version of the demo it was, and we continued. So if you have a nice strong melody to work from, and you approach it from like the opera sense of using a motif to support either a thought or a character or a place or a thing or a theme, you can really do anything. And it could be just a really simple thought.
Perfect. There we go. Everyone, take note. Take note.
Mm.
Tips from an expert there. So, yeah, thank you so very much for taking the time to talk to us. Have you got anything, any secret tidbits or any projects that you're working on that we might have something in the know about anytime soon?
How much can I talk about? I have 8 or 9 different projects right now that are on the go at different stages. Fossil Hunters does count because the album is now coming out.
Yowzers, though.
Yeah. I I can say that I am working again with Vertex Pop. We're making a video game. I can say that, and I'm on the soundtrack.
Hey.
And I'm continuing to work with Secret Location, following up Blasters of the Universe. And outside of that, I'm not sure that I can say much else, but I am working. I assure you, new music is in the works.
And that is all we need to be in the know of. We've got more Robby stuff coming our way. So
I hope you're nearly as excited as I am.
oh, I am, especially with the width and depth of what you get up to. I'm super intrigued to find out what's coming, as I'm sure us people on Higher Plane Music will be as well. But thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you so much for letting me ramble on today.
You're very welcome. Fossil Hunters is out on June the 25th. I thoroughly recommend that you grab it now. Awesome. Thank you so much. That was really interesting.
Thank you. I sort of got off on a tangent at some point, but I hopefully brought it back to a point that was interesting eventually.
It's all good. We love a tangent over here. Don't worry.
Good. Excellent.
Yeah, superb. Well, I wish you all the very best with that.
Thank you very much.
And thank you so much for reaching out to us. Absolute privilege.
Appreciate it.
Cheers.
Thank you, Simon.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. This channel is just one of my many projects that cover games, music and film. If you enjoy any of these and would consider supporting me to develop further in the future, you can do so by visiting patreon.com/Satorimon. Thank you for your time and for watching the video.